A fresh Drake leak landed, and the internet reacted exactly how anyone would expect. Instantly, loudly, relentlessly. People didn't just listen, they rushed to dissect it. Messages started flying everywhere. Group chats lit up. Comment sections exploded. Everyone seemed to be saying the same thing. Drake was back in that familiar mode. Back to throwing subtle jabs. Back to stirring conversations without directly naming names. And right away, speculation centered on one recurring theme. Was this another Kendrick shot? Listeners didn't hesitate. They rarely do when it comes to Drake. Every lyric becomes evidence. Every line becomes a clue. Every phrase becomes part of a larger narrative. Because with Drake, nothing is ever just a verse. There's always context. There's always history. There's always tension sitting beneath the surface. And this leak? It arrived carrying plenty of both. But before diving into the bars themselves, there's something more interesting to unpack, something bigger than a single freestyle. What does it say about Drake at this stage? That's where things get truly compelling. One of the most talked about moments in the leak revolved around a simple but loaded idea. Talking about Drake equals attention. Attention equals streams. Streams equal success. It's a claim that feels both undeniable and controversial at the same time. Because objectively, Drake remains a gravitational force in music. Mention his name, and conversations spark automatically. Headlines form effortlessly. Algorithms respond instantly. Few artists command that level of visibility. But here's where the tension creeps in. Is this confidence? Or is this defensiveness wrapped as confidence? That distinction matters. On one hand, Drake stating his cultural weight isn't shocking. He's built a career on dominance, on numbers, on longevity. On the other hand, repeatedly emphasizing that others benefit from discussing him begins to feel pointed, almost like a reminder, almost like justification. And that subtle shift in tone is where audiences start reading between the lines. Because when statements of power begin sounding like reassurance, people naturally start asking questions. Questions Drake probably didn't intend, but inevitably triggered. And that's just the beginning of the pattern. Even the technical quality of the leak raises eyebrows. The vocals sound slightly altered, pitched, adjusted. Now, that detail might seem minor, but in leak culture, nothing is minor. Fans immediately wonder, was this intentional? Was it modified to avoid takedowns? Was it unfinished material? Or was it strategically released? Leaks today don't function like accidental spills anymore. They've evolved into something else entirely. They become previews, temperature checks, soft launches disguised as mistakes. Artists can now observe reactions without committing, gauge audience sentiment without fully stepping into the spotlight. And Drake? He's no stranger to calculated moves, which makes the existence of leaks feel less like coincidence and more like strategy. Because if multiple snippets appear, then full versions follow, then conversations build. At what point does leak simply become rollout? That question sits quietly in the background, shaping how listeners interpret everything else, including the lyrics themselves. There's something strikingly consistent about Drake's recent output. A recurring emotional angle keeps surfacing. The misunderstood figure, the betrayed ally, the artist who helped many but now feels targeted. It's a narrative that has appeared repeatedly across verses, features, and freestyles. And here's the critical observation. Consistency can feel like authenticity, but repetition can feel like stagnation. That line between the two is razor thin. Listeners begin recognizing patterns quickly. The brain naturally does that. When themes echo too frequently, they lose novelty. Even valid emotions begin feeling recycled. Even real grievances begin sounding rehearsed, which creates a difficult dilemma. Because Drake absolutely has grounds for reflection, for frustration, for commentary. But delivery matters. Variation matters. Evolution matters. Without those, even strong sentiments risk blending into background noise. And that's where the conversation starts shifting from what he's saying to how often he's saying it. A subtle but powerful difference. One bar particularly fuels debate. The idea of someone entering a rap battle and then stepping into legal territory. That tension touches on one of hip-hop's most sensitive fault lines. Competition versus litigation. Rap thrives on confrontation, on lyrical warfare, on dominance through artistry. But when conflicts extend beyond music, audiences become divided. Some view legal action as practical self-protection. Others see it as breaking unwritten codes. And Drake referencing this dynamic reopens that entire conversation. Because listeners don't hear lyrics in isolation. They hear history. They hear subtext. They hear implications. And suddenly, one line becomes commentary on modern rap culture itself. What are the rules now? Have they changed? Were they ever truly fixed? Questions pile up fast, and Drake's words unintentionally become a catalyst for all of them. Another familiar Drake pillar appears. Wealth, success, flexing prosperity. Now, this is where nuance becomes essential. Celebrating financial elevation is deeply embedded in hip-hop's DNA. It represents triumph, escape, achievement against odds. Criticizing artists for discussing wealth often ignores that cultural context. And Drake? Few embody financial success like he does. But timing shapes perception. After intense public battles, after scrutiny, after controversy, money bars can land differently. They can feel triumphant, or they can feel like distraction, or they can feel like retreating to safer territory. Again, interpretation depends on listener mindset. And Drake's challenge lies in navigating that shifting lens. Because audiences aren't just hearing riches. They're hearing what riches symbolize in that specific moment. Perhaps the most interesting critique revolves around cadence, delivery, flow selection. Listeners increasingly sense familiarity, certain rhythmic patterns, certain tonal shifts, certain vocal inflections. And here's where an intriguing analogy emerges. Imagine watching a magician repeatedly. Same tricks, different days. Even brilliant illusions lose impact once mechanisms become recognizable. Drake's artistry remains undeniable, but omnipresence changes how artistry is perceived. When audiences consume large volumes of similar sonic textures, freshness becomes harder to maintain. Not because skill disappears, but because surprise diminishes. And surprise is currency in music. Drake's visibility has been relentless for years. Albums, features, leaks, collaborations, freestyles, verses. Few artists sustain that level of output without extended breaks. But saturation creates paradoxes. Staying present maintains dominance. Yet constant presence reduces mystique. Scarcity historically enhances impact. Absence builds anticipation. Return amplifies reception, which raises a fascinating hypothetical. Would the same material feel different after silence? Would perception shift? Would familiarity transform into nostalgia? Timing, once again, becomes everything. Another subtle factor complicates reactions. Drake's influence is everywhere. Many artists adopted elements of his melodic instincts, cadences, emotional framing, and sonic choices. Audiences hear echoes constantly, and distinguishing originator from imitators becomes psychologically blurred, a strange artistic consequence of cultural dominance. Ultimately, this leaks sparks of broader conversation than a single freestyle ever could. It touches artistry, visibility, evolution, perception, expectation, and Drake remains at the center of it all. Still influential, still debated, still impossible to ignore. Now the real question lingers. Where does he go next? Because whatever direction emerges, people will be watching, listening, and analyzing as always. Drop a comment. I want to know what you think. Did Drake's bars feel calculated, repetitive, misunderstood, strategic? Remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't. It helps a lot.